For 23 years, one man stood between fame and silence. He didn't shout, he didn't argue, he didn't need to. On Sunday nights, Ed Sullivan welcomed America into its living room and quietly decided who belonged there. Most performers believed the danger was failing on stage. They were wrong. The real risk came after the applause faded, when the cameras stopped rolling, and when Ed Sullivan made a decision no one announced publicly. Tonight, we revisit the performers who crossed that invisible line, not with scandal, not with crime, but with one appearance that changed everything. Number 1, Bob Dylan, the performance that never happened. In 1963, Bob Dylan was standing at the edge of something enormous. He wasn't yet a global icon. He wasn't a Nobel laureate, but his songs were already unsettling people in power. When Dylan was invited to appear on The Ed Sullivan Show, it should have been a breakthrough moment. The show reached tens of millions of viewers, the most powerful platform in American television. For most young performers, this appearance meant instant legitimacy. But behind the scenes, tension began building long before Dylan ever stepped on stage. The song Dylan planned to perform that night was Talkin' John Birch, Paranoid Blues. On the surface, it was humorous. Beneath that humor, it was sharply political. A satire aimed at the paranoia of the era, referencing the John Birch Society, a far-right organization viewed as controversial even by network standards. CBS executives grew uneasy. According to multiple historical accounts, Dylan was asked, not demanded, to change the song. Other options were offered, safer choices, songs that would avoid discomfort, sponsors, and controversy. Dylan refused. This is the moment where many stories exaggerate what happened next. There was no shouting match, no dramatic confrontation on camera, no official ban announced to the press. Instead, Dylan quietly walked out. Minutes before airtime, one of the most anticipated performances of the season simply vanished. Bob Dylan never appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show again. No statement was issued, no blacklist was published, but the message was unmistakable. In the early 1960s, live television was not a place for ambiguity or dissent. It was a space governed by caution, sponsors, and a very narrow definition of what was acceptable in American living rooms. Dylan would go on to reshape music history, but not from that stage. And for Ed Sullivan, the decision was just as telling. He didn't need to say banned. He simply closed the door and let silence do the rest. Number 2, Bo Diddley. When one song became a line in the sand. By the mid-1950s, Bo Diddley wasn't just another performer chasing airtime. He was already reshaping popular music. His rhythm, later known simply as the Bo Diddley beat, would echo through rock and roll for decades. But in the rigid world of early network television, innovation came with conditions. When Bo Diddley was invited onto The Ed Sullivan Show, the expectation from CBS was clear. Perform a different song, a safer one. Something lighter, something that fit neatly into the controlled atmosphere of Sunday night television. Bo Diddley agreed to appear. What he didn't agree to do was change who he was. When the cameras went live, he performed his own song, not the one requested. The moment passed without chaos. The audience applauded. Viewers at home likely noticed nothing unusual, but backstage, it was a different story. Ed Sullivan, known for strict control over his program, was reportedly furious, not because the performance failed, but because authority had been challenged. On his stage, deviations weren't creative risks. They were acts of defiance. There was no argument broadcast to the public, no confrontation replayed in headlines. Instead, something quieter happened. Bo Diddley was not invited back, not the following season, not years later, not even as his influence on rock music exploded. At a time when other performers returned repeatedly, sometimes dozens of times, Bo Diddley's absence stood out. The show moved on. The audience moved on. Television did not look back. For Ed Sullivan, control mattered as much as talent, and Bo Diddley had crossed a boundary that wasn't written into any contract. The lesson was simple, and everyone in the industry understood it. You could be groundbreaking. You could be influential. But on that stage, obedience came first. Bo Diddley didn't lose his career that night, but he lost something just as valuable in that era, a permanent place in America's most powerful living room. And once again, no explanation was ever given. Number 3, Jackie Mason, the night everything fell apart on live television. No appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show ended more abruptly or more controversially than Jackie Mason's. By the early 1960s, Mason was a rising star in stand-up comedy. Sharp, fast-talking, and unapologetically expressive, he brought a style that felt modern, but dangerously unpredictable for live television. On the night of his appearance, tension filled the studio even before Mason began speaking. Ed Sullivan, known for strict timing and control, was reportedly frustrated backstage by production issues and delays. As Mason launched into his routine, Sullivan began signaling for him to wrap up early, cutting time without explanation. What happened next would become one of the most debated moments in television history. As Mason continued speaking, he gestured with his hands, a common habit in his comedy. At one point, Sullivan abruptly walked on stage and told the audience that Mason had made an obscene gesture toward him on live television. The accusation stunned the room. Mason denied it immediately. He insisted the gesture was misunderstood, that it was a harmless motion, taken out of context under pressure. But live television left no room for clarification. Sullivan, visibly angry, ended the segment on the spot. The cameras rolled on. The audience sat in confusion. At home, viewers sensed that something had gone deeply wrong, even if they didn't fully understand what. After that night, Jackie Mason never appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show again. No apology was issued, no official investigation followed. The two men told completely different versions of the story for the rest of their lives. To this day, there is no definitive proof of what truly happened in that moment. What remains undeniable is the outcome. In an era where Ed Sullivan controlled the most powerful stage in America, being accused, fairly or not, was enough. Mason's career continued elsewhere. He found success on stage, in clubs, and later in television. But the door to America's most influential show was closed permanently. The incident became a warning whispered throughout the industry. On Ed Sullivan's stage, perception mattered more than intent. And once trust was broken, even for a second, it was never restored. Number 4, the Rolling Stones, allowed on stage, but never fully welcomed. By the time the Rolling Stones appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1967, they were already infamous. Their image was dangerous by television standards. Long hair, defiant posture, and music that felt deliberately provocative. For Ed Sullivan, inviting them onto his stage was a calculated risk. For the band, it was a necessary confrontation with America's most conservative gatekeeper. The conflict centered on a single song, "Let's Spend the Night Together." CBS executives immediately objected to the title and lyrics, fearing backlash from sponsors and family audiences. Ed Sullivan delivered the condition clearly. The Stones could perform, but only if the lyrics were changed. Reluctantly, the band agreed. On live television, Mick Jagger sang a revised version of the song, altering the words to something far more acceptable. But as the cameras rolled, Jagger exaggeratedly rolled his eyes, subtly but unmistakably, signaling his disdain for the compromise. The audience laughed. Viewers noticed. Ed Sullivan did not miss it. The performance ended without incident. No argument, no interruption. On paper, everything went smoothly, but something had shifted. Unlike many artists who became recurring favorites on the show, the Rolling Stones' relationship with Ed Sullivan never fully recovered. Future appearances were tightly controlled, lyrics were scrutinized, camera angles were deliberate, freedom was limited. They were no longer guests. They were liabilities being managed. This was not a band in the traditional sense. The Rolling Stones were too popular to simply erase, but they were no longer trusted. The warmth that Sullivan extended to compliant performers was absent. In the world of network television, that distinction mattered. Ed Sullivan valued control above all else. The Stones had technically followed the rules, but publicly challenged the authority behind them. And that, on his stage, was unforgettable. The band would go on to dominate rock history. They would outgrow television restrictions entirely. But the Ed Sullivan Show never became their home. They were allowed to pass through, but never invited to stay. Number 5, Sam Cooke, the silence that followed. Sam Cooke's story on The Ed Sullivan Show is not defined by a single scandal, but by what didn't happen afterward. By the early 1960s, Cooke was already one of the most important voices in American music. His performances were polished, controlled, and deeply emotional. He carried himself with professionalism that made him difficult to criticize, on or off stage. When Sam Cooke appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, nothing went wrong. There were no controversial lyrics, no defiant gestures, no tension visible to viewers at home. The performance was well received, and yet something about his presence did not translate into permanence. Unlike many white performers of the era, some of whom appeared on the show dozens of times, Cooke's invitations were limited. His appearances did not turn into a recurring relationship. Gradually, quietly, his name stopped appearing in the lineup. There was no announcement, no explanation, no dramatic fallout, just absence. This is what makes Sam Cooke's case so unsettling. In an era when national television exposure shaped careers, repeated visibility mattered. Being welcomed back signaled approval. Being forgotten, especially without cause, sent a different message. Cooke continued to thrive elsewhere. His records sold, his influence expanded. His voice became inseparable from the civil rights era. But on America's most powerful variety show, his presence faded without comment. Historians have long debated why. Some point to shifting musical tastes. Others note the discomfort networks had with artists who represented quiet social change, even without overt statements. What remains clear is the pattern. Sam Cooke did not fail the stage. He did not offend the audience. He did not break the rules, yet the door never opened again. In old Hollywood and early television, silence was not accidental. It was procedural. And for performers who didn't fit neatly into the image television wanted to project, disappearance required no justification. Sometimes the most telling ban was the one no one ever admitted existed. Number 6, Lenny Bruce, too honest for America's living room. Lenny Bruce didn't shock audiences by accident. That was the point. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, Bruce was redefining what stand-up comedy could be. He spoke about hypocrisy, religion, race, politics, subjects most performers avoided entirely on network television. His comedy wasn't designed for punchlines alone. It was designed to confront. That made him dangerous. When Lenny Bruce appeared on national television, including variety formats of the era, the discomfort was immediate. Not because he used profanity, he largely avoided it on broadcast, but because his ideas pushed against the unspoken rules of American living rooms. The Ed Sullivan Show was built on those rules. Family-friendly, predictable, safe for sponsors. Bruce didn't fit that ecosystem. Unlike other performers who were scolded, edited, or carefully guided back into acceptable territory, Lenny Bruce represented something harder to manage. Unpredictability rooted in intellect. His routines could not be fully rehearsed into submission. His meaning could not be softened without destroying the act itself. There was no dramatic fallout tied to a single on-air moment. No confrontation replayed in headlines. No official ban announced. Instead, invitations stopped coming. As Bruce's legal troubles increased, largely tied to obscenity laws that would later be viewed as excessive, television networks grew even more cautious. Associating with him meant risk, not just cultural risk, but financial and legal risk. For Ed Sullivan, the calculation was simple. The show did not exist to challenge America's values. It existed to reflect them. Lenny Bruce was doing the opposite. While his influence on comedy continued to grow, inspiring an entire generation of future performers, he became increasingly absent from mainstream television. His voice moved to clubs, underground venues, and courtrooms. By the time public opinion began to shift in his favor, it was too late for him, and far too late for the kind of television he was never allowed to belong to. Lenny Bruce was not expelled from the Ed Sullivan Show with a single decision. He was filtered out, quietly, systematically, and completely. Number 7, Pearl Bailey, fading without a scandal. Pearl Bailey was never a problem performer. She was charismatic, elegant, and immensely talented, a singer and actress who could command a stage without raising her voice. In the 1950s, she was widely admired by audiences and respected within the industry. When she appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, her performances were warm, polished, and enthusiastically received. Nothing went wrong. And yet, over time, something quietly changed. Bailey's appearances on the show became less frequent, then sporadic, then absent. There was no incident viewers could point to, no uncomfortable moment replayed in press coverage, no explanation from the network. She simply stopped being part of the conversation. This is what makes Pearl Bailey's case so difficult to pin down and so revealing. Unlike performers who challenge authority or push boundaries, Bailey fit perfectly within the surface expectations of variety television. She respected the format. She respected the audience. She delivered exactly what was asked of her. But early television was not governed only by performance quality. It was shaped by unspoken calculations about image, comfort, and repetition. Who felt familiar? Who felt safe? And who could be quietly replaced without anyone asking why? As newer acts emerged and the industry's priorities shifted, some performers were elevated again and again, becoming staples of the show. Others, like Bailey, were gradually rotated out, despite continued success elsewhere. She did not vanish from entertainment. Her career continued on Broadway, in recordings, and in live performances. But the most powerful television platform of the era no longer made room for her. There was no ban to protest, no decision to appeal, no controversy to resolve. Just absence. In the controlled world of network television, being forgotten was not accidental. It was a byproduct of choices made quietly, behind closed doors, where explanations were neither required nor offered. Pearl Bailey's story reminds us that not every exclusion was dramatic. Some were simply procedural. Number 8, Pete Seeger, welcomed once, then carefully kept at a distance. Pete Seeger's relationship with American television was complicated long before he ever stepped onto a national stage. By the time he appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, Seeger was already known as a respected folk musician, thoughtful, articulate, and deeply connected to traditional American music. His songs were not aggressive, they were not obscene, but they carried ideas. And in the climate of Cold War America, ideas were closely monitored. Seeger's appearance on the show went smoothly. There was no disruption, no backlash from the audience, no visible discomfort on stage. And yet, unlike other folk performers who later became regulars, Seeger's presence did not expand. His appearances were limited, carefully controlled, then eventually non-existent. Once again, there was no announcement. The context matters. During the 1950s, Seeger had been associated, fairly or not, with left-leaning political movements. He had faced questioning during the era of congressional investigations, an experience that placed him in a category television executives treated with extreme caution. For Ed Sullivan and CBS, the calculation was familiar. Television was not the place to reopen political anxieties. Sponsors expected comfort, not controversy. And Sunday night audiences expected reassurance, not reflection. Seeger was never accused of wrongdoing on air. He was never confronted publicly. He was simply managed. For years, Seeger continued performing to packed halls and devoted listeners. His influence on American folk music only grew. Younger artists carried his songs forward, often appearing on the very television programs he no longer did. By the time public attitudes softened and Seeger was eventually welcomed back to national television decades later, an entire era had already passed. His absence from The Ed Sullivan Show was not about a single moment. It was about what he represented. In early television, belonging was not determined solely by talent or decorum. It was shaped by the invisible boundaries of the time. Boundaries enforced not with bans or declarations, but with quiet decisions that required no explanation. Pete Seeger crossed no visible line, but he stood too close to one. In the history of American television, very few people ever needed to raise their voice. Ed Sullivan was one of them. There were no public blacklists, no dramatic announcements, no explanations offered to the audience. Yet careers shifted, opportunities narrowed, and some names slowly vanished from the most powerful stage of their time. What these stories reveal isn't just the authority of one man, but the nature of early television itself, a system built on comfort, control, and invisible boundaries. Boundaries you were never warned about until you crossed them. Some performers pushed back. Some refused to bend. Others did everything right and still disappeared. In old Hollywood, being banned didn't always mean being told no. Sometimes it simply meant never being asked again, and the silence that followed was often louder than any scandal.